so that we can get out of here hopefully a little bit early tonight. So this is what came out. It actually came out in September. There have been a couple of revisions to this, but this is what TEA sent out, and they're calling it, rather than the accommodations training, they're calling it the accessibility training, and it talks about the designated supports. They're having a few changes. A lot of things are going to remain the same. So the disclaimer is it's been prepared by TEA. You still have to go through the campus training and review the campus manuals when your campus coordinator comes and issues everything to you. Okay, so these are the STAAR accessibility updates for 2018. There's a few policy changes, and I'm going to just skip this slide because it goes into great depth later on in the PowerPoint about this. Accessibility, which I kind of don't like that they changed that because now it really sounds like special education, right? But some of these are applicable to 504 as well. But we do want to make the test accessible to everyone that might need it. So we want to ensure that every student can interact appropriately with all the content. All test takers can demonstrate their knowledge of the content, and then to meet this goal, various features and supports are made available on paper as well as online. So a lot of this will be a repeat, but they do have some updated information. And if you want to look at a website with the different accommodation resources, it's there. Okay, this is what the web page looks like if you log into TEA. And it will change after December, when the tests happen in December. Some of that information is now changed on the TEA website. Okay, so we all know this. Accommodations are individualized to every single student that needs them. It might be appropriate. They should be evaluated regularly to see if the student is actually using them and if they are beneficial to the student. And they also have to be documented in ARD paperwork. A designated support is not necessary for every student. They're not changing to changing to performance criteria or content. They are not provided to give an advantage to the student. So if you say this student can read pretty well, but I'm going to give them oral admin just to give them that extra, it's not for extra. They're to level the playing field, not to give an advantage. And they should not be provided to a student without evidence of effectiveness, and you have to reevaluate through data that effectiveness every year. And we already went over that. They have to be evaluated, and they are not intended to give an advantage. We've had a lot of questions from a lot of, usually parents, requesting oral administration to give them that extra little push. So accessibility features can be found in the district and campus coordinator manuals when you get them with the STAAR test. They are available to any student who regularly benefits from the use of these procedures or materials during instruction, and that's kind of the sticking point. If you're going to say this student needs colored overlays for the assessment, they need to be using them regularly in class. We don't want to give students blank bookmarks or trackers so they can read when it's assessment time if they have not regularly used it during instruction and prove that they need that during instruction. A student may need to complete the test in a separate setting to eliminate distractions. We have a lot of students that receive small group, but what's the number for small group? What's the sticking point? There is none. There is none. So to me, small group might mean 5 or less. To some, the small group might be 20, depending on class size. There is no sticking point. We cannot require to use them, to make the student use them. So if you say, in your ARD, we said you are going to use a calculation aid and you will use a graphic organizer. We give that to them, but we can't say you must use this. It's there. They can use it if they choose, but we are not required to force them to use that. Okay. These are the different accessibility features. We can sign the test. That means sign language. We can translate that test administration directions. Of course, you can't actually translate the test, but you can do the directions. The bilingual dictionary is word-to-word translations, but no definitions or example for math, science, and social studies. Students can read aloud to themselves, like with the PVC whisper phones, if they need to do that, or they can read into a recording device, but we cannot record it for them. Reading aloud or signing the expository or persuasive writing prompt. The first time I read it, I thought it said singing. I thought, oh, someone's going to go and sing the assessment. No, that's sign language. Reading assistance on the grade 3 math test. Scratch paper, and it has to be a medium that can be erased or can be destroyed. Color overlays or online color settings. Blank place markers or online guideline tool. Magnifying devices or online zoom feature, but again, in order to qualify for that magnification, you have to show a need, right? Highlighters, including an online tool. Tools to minimize distraction or help maintain focus. They can have a stress ball, headphones, instrumental music playing. Nothing can be connected to the internet, though. Individual or small group administrations, reminding the student to stay on task. And the new ones for this year are sticky notes tool that's added to the online system. Use of amplification devices, which would be speakers or FM systems. And then the use of a projection device, which could be some sort of LCD projector that might enhance the size. Any questions on that? Okay. Then the locally approved designated supports. There are 12 supports, and I'm going to go through this screen because it goes into great depth with those throughout the PowerPoint. So the new ones are the STAAR Dictionary Policy and the STAAR Calculator Policy. And there is a hyperlink to these when I send you the PowerPoint. You can click on that, but it also goes into detail later on with that as well. So designated supports would be basic transcribing. What's that look like? Could be bubbling. Or if someone has a struggle with writing, they could say what they want you to write on a, if they're writing a passage, and you could write word for word what that is. Braille, calculation aids. It includes a calculator if they need it. There are other calculation aids. Content and language supports, and there are guidelines for that. Extra time. What's the amount of time that they're allowed to? Okay. Well, it's usually 4 hours, and then if they need extra time, it's at the end of the school day. Individualized structured reminders, and that could be paper clips that tell them, turn to the next page, or a sticky note that's blank. Large print, manipulating test materials for the student. Math manipulatives, oral or signed administration, spelling assistance, and then supplemental aids. So for basic transcribing, it tells you, if you have the PowerPoint in front of you, this designated support allows the test administrator to transfer student responses onto an answer document or into the STAAR assessment management system, or online administrators when a student is unable to accomplish that independently. So if they use speech to text, they can indicate a response, and it has to be documented. Okay, for Braille, they're also eligible, if they have a need for Braille, to have content and language supports. Request for paper version of the STAAR can be embedded within that. Specific information about administering Braille tests is available, mostly for Tim and Michelle. And there is no need to submit an accommodation for extra day. You don't have to do that submission anymore, because we're just going to assume that it's going to take an extra day for students doing Braille. So a lot of these things we'll have to submit to TEA to get approval on the accommodations, but no longer do we have to do that. They're giving them an extra day. Calculation aids. Calculators used by eligible students as a designated support must adhere to the guidelines set in the STAAR Calculator Policy on the TEA resource webpage. So it now includes grade 8 science. So there are certain grades where all students are given calculators. If your student is not in the grade where it is automatically a designated support, you have to have it documented in the ARD that they receive it. So grade 8 math, everybody gets one. Grade 6, they don't. It has to be in the ARD. Content language supports, this is also updated. They've been combined into one embedded support. Students for whom the LPAC recommends the use of this support for any reading or writing assessment may not be considered for exit at the end of this school year. So if they're still needing those language supports, they're not going to be able to exit LPAC that year. Okay, extra time. A student should be allowed to continue testing until the end of the regularly scheduled school day, but cannot be required to continue testing. We can't force them. You need to recheck this. If it takes you the rest of the day, that's okay. We cannot do that. A student should be allowed to leave the testing room when they've completed the test. And then this is new. Students for whom the LPAC recommends the use of this support for any reading or writing assessment may not be considered for exit at the end of the school year. Individualized structured reminders. This is going to take the form of paper clips or adhesive notes to divide the text into sections, and more frequent or less frequent reminders of time left other than what they already have. Usually the teachers will have, start time here, end time here, and they'll give reminders and write it on the board. If your student requires more than that, they can have those individualized structured reminders. And we can have a personal timer or clock set to remind the student to move to the next question or the next page, but it can't be their iPhone if it's linked to the internet. You have to make sure it's not able to access the internet. Large print. New for 2018, there is no longer a need to submit an accommodation form for large print if it's needed for a student with a visual impairment. That's new as well. We don't have to submit that in advance. They already get it. So manipulating test materials. If a student needs his or her responses to test questions transcribed, if it's griddable or bubbling or writing, whatever it is, onto an answer document or into the online assessment manager, we can do that for them. You have to be careful when you're manipulating that you're not pointing to or directing them to the answer, though. Math manipulatives. This is also new. For a student not receiving special education or 504 services, the decision has to be made by the appropriate team of people. It could be an RTI team or a student assistance team based on the eligibility criteria and is documented according to district policies. So we can't just say, hey, I think you need some math manipulatives and throw them in there. There has to be documentation. They have to be regularly and effectively used in the classroom. Any questions on this so far? Okay. Oral and signed administration. This has also been updated for students for whom the LPAC recommends the use of this support for any reading or writing assessment. They cannot be considered for exit at the end of the year. And there are different levels of support. Parts of the test question and answer choices at the student request, all test questions and answer choices throughout the test. So this is pretty much the same. If you're taking a reading assessment, I can read the directions and I can read the questions and answer choices, but you can't actually read the passage. Okay? Otherwise, it's not really a reading test. Okay, so for spelling assistance, this is new. There is a spelling assistance tool that's available, and it's in the online system. It's kind of cool. Supplemental aids for a student that's not receiving special education or 504. This has to be, again, made by a team, the RTI team or whatever, and is based on eligibility criteria. How are they eligible for supplemental aids? And if everybody gets a supplemental aid, like a blank graphic organizer, that's not an accommodation because everybody gets it. But when you start populating things on there, that becomes an accommodation. The ones that require TEA approval, they have to be made available to students who have the TEA approved accommodation. First, the decisions are made by the appropriate team that's on a campus level, and then the designated support policy documents that are located on the accommodations resource page, blah, blah, blah. This is very exciting to read. Okay, if they do require TEA approval, it's going to fall into the category of complex transcribing, an extra day unless they require Braille, math scribe, or other. So for 2018, no more photocopy as a designated support that requires an accommodation request form. If a student needs secure test material photocopied because he requires larger print than what the state provides, we have to follow the instructions. And if a student needs photocopies for any other reason, then we have to submit an online request form for other. Yes?
This is not STAAR Alt.
It's not STAAR Alt. STAAR Alt is a whole different animal.
Make sure we can still photocopy.
Well, if it's in their accommodations, yes. Yes, and that would mean if you're photocopying, then you're also doing it in the classroom. So whatever you're doing for accommodations on the assessment, in all areas of STAAR, you have to be doing the same thing in the classroom. Otherwise, it's going to confuse kids if suddenly you're throwing all these things at them that they've never used. Complex transcribing. TEA will provide with any approved accommodation request form specific guidelines for how to transcribe, and the test administrator has to be trained. And then for 2018, for TELPAS writing, grades 2 through 12, an accommodation request form does not need to be submitted for a student that meets eligibility for complex transcribing as far as TELPAS. Extra day. Receiving extra day to complete the test is a designated support intended for extremely small groups of students with disabilities who have TEA approval. Everybody will probably want an extra day so they could look at the answers, right, and come back. I don't know. Students will only be permitted to test over 2 regularly scheduled consecutive school days. Each day of testing must not extend beyond 7 hours. And for this year, 2018, students who take the Braille test, we don't have to have that again. Whoops. Math scribe. A math scribe's role is to record the students' dictated scratch work and computations because they have to show their work. So we have to scribe all that and their computations exactly as the student states it. TEA will provide specific guidelines about how to carry that out, and the test administrator has to be trained in those guidelines so that they don't cross the boundaries regarding assistance they're providing. Does anybody in this room have a student that has a math scribe? It's kind of rare. Okay, so if a student requires double-sided test materials photocopied into single-sided sheets because they have some sort of physical disability, or they have a disability that necessitates test materials be presented in a printed format other than a test booklet to prevent severe behaviors that could interfere with completion of the test, an accommodation request form or other should be submitted to TEA. Should be very, very rare. The district may now submit other requests via the online system, which is nice. Okay, so technology use guidelines. We have to have procedures in place to prevent the use of personal electronic devices being used during STAAR assessments. When districts are allowed or approved technology, including technology-based accommodations, which includes the accessibility features in the online system, the following guidelines must be followed to review the technology prior to its assessment. Appropriate review requires knowledge of both the state curriculum for specific grade level and subject, as well as capabilities and functions of the device or software being used. Some technology that's really useful during instruction isn't necessarily going to be valuable for the assessment. And district and campus personnel have to conduct additional reviews of technology after an upgrade or after an update to make sure that it still meets the TEA guidelines. For example, in the dictionary, if it suddenly is giving you the definition rather than just the word to word, then you can't do that. There will be another training presentation. So special paper request process. Because the content and language supports are embedded accommodations presented in an online format, replicating these features is not always possible. Technology-based supports enable most students to test online. However, in instances in which the use of an accommodation is not feasible or appropriate, or if the administration of an online test is inappropriate due to a student's particular disability, a special request may be made to TEA for approval to administer a paper test booklet. If you want students taking the online version, they also want a booklet, that's again very rare. The content and language supports for students taking STAAR Braille, they're available. in the management system. The document is meant to be used for students taking Braille who are also eligible to receive the content and language supports, because if they're not eligible for both, then they don't get both. It contains descriptions or pictures and images used as content and language supports, and graphs, tables, charts that may be reproduced in Braille. And I'll just go over that with Tim and Michelle if we need to do that in greater depth. Special paper request process. There are instructions that with a hyperlink when I send you the PowerPoint. If you want to look at that, you can. And all requests have to be received by TEA at least 2 weeks prior to the assessment, so don't wait till the last minute. The accommodation request process. Step 1 is determine the eligibility, and then completion and submission of the online form. The TEA will review and decide, and then the required communication with the district will happen after that. So that's why they need a little bit of time built in so they can have time to review it and get back with us. Accommodation request, just because you submit it does not mean it's been approved, so you do have to wait till the approval comes. Do not include confidential student information on this form, and this is really more for the campus testing coordinator because you wouldn't be doing that. But we don't ever want any names or dates or ID numbers going out of our district. There are special situations. Let's say that the day before or the morning of, somebody falls and breaks their arms, or they lose their glasses, or they break their glasses. It may not be necessary to contact TEA. That's a Cindy Borden question. Your campus coordinator will contact her, and she'll be able to determine if the student can go ahead and receive some accommodations because of the broken glasses or the broken arm. For example, they might need basic transcribing if their arm is broken, and the day before they wouldn't have. So, no need to contact TEA, but contact your campus people. Grade 4 STAAR Writing Online. We can transcribe the response to the written composition. The student does not have to be eligible for basic transcribing to receive this assistance, and it does not need to be documented. The test administrator transcribing the student's response must do so in accordance with the guidelines, and students in all other grades have to meet the eligibility requirements. Anybody have grade 4 writing students this year? Not? A few of you did. Not STAAR Alt. Okay, accommodation recommendations for reading and writing. There is an impact on the exit criteria for English language learners. Students for whom the LPAC recommends the following designated supports for any reading or writing assessment may not be considered if they have oral admin, content and language supports, or extra time. So those decisions are definitely going to impact them in other ways. Here's the dictionary policy in a little more depth. The use of the dictionaries on grades 3 through 5 reading and writing assessments is no longer an accommodation. It's a designated support, which means that anybody can use it if they need it. It's important for LPACs to consider the degree to which an ELL student relies on the dictionary when they're making exit decisions. Okay, there are some online tutorials. If you have a student that's taking the STAAR online so they can practice and get familiar with the layout of it. When you open it, you go down to tutorials, and then it'll just tell you screen by screen what you need to do. You choose the grade, you choose the subject, and it will lead you through a sample. It's not going to give you some of the questions that they're going to offer on the test, but they do have some STAAR release tests that you can have the students practice with. The videos, if you have a kid that says, Miss, or Sir, there's no sound on the videos, that is correct, except for the speak and audio videos, which only read aloud the text on the screen. Any other videos, there's no audio. Okay, so the second page of each tab you can use to practice. This shows you what happens when there's a pop-up. You hover over that and it says Austin is the capital of Texas. And then you can also practice. That was the tutorial on how to use the system. The practice would be practice taking the supports with the TTS, which is text to speech, the pre-reads, the pop-ups, and the rollovers, and you can select all PMP. This is a release test. It's an example of what it looks like online. So down here, it's going to correlate. Article to find out more about R2, the robot astronaut. We'll highlight information and take it back so you can try to figure out what those supports. Accomplish means to complete. It's the online dictionary. Okay, additional accessibility resources, and I will send this to you electronically. And wow, we did that quickly. If you have any questions, Cindy Borden can answer them. Your campus district or coordinator can, campus testing coordinator, and we'll have another training for STAAR Alts as it gets closer to that. If you have questions, please stay. If not, you're free to go.